The Education Lounge podcast.
Welcome to episode 5 of the Education Lounge podcast. I'm John and this is Project. Today we're going to talk about how did people fare during the lockdown period? How did children fare during that period? And how it affected their education, mental health and so on. And exams, obviously. So I think we're going to start, the first thing I have on my agenda is mental health. So with the lockdown period, obviously children weren't able to socialise with their friends, see other people, and really they had very limited interaction with the outside world. Furthermore, they're unable to sort of do the things that they do day to day, such as sport, attend school, etc. So we're going to talk a bit about the findings in terms of the literature. So if we look at some of the statistics, so this is from the Office of National Statistics. It says that 4 in 10 11 to 16-year-olds felt that lockdown had made their life worse. Okay. 3 in 10 reported no change, and 3 in 10 reported lockdown had made their life better. But overall, we can see that it made their life worse because 4 in 10's more than 3 in 10. More than half of 11 to 16-year-olds with a probable mental disorder said their life was worse under lockdown. So you've got sort of mental illness sort of compounded by sort of the issues that you see in lockdown. And then
anxiety mainly.
Yeah.
A lot of anxiety.
Well, I don't know if you experienced any sort of issues during that time, but
Yeah, I mean, the very fact that, well, we've discussed it, the fact that we've gone for more walks during lockdown kind of shows that we were more anxious because you use walks to counteract that.
Yeah, we found a love of walking, which I
yeah.
suppose is a good thing.
It's a good outcome, yeah.
Yeah, making the best of a bad situation.
Well, I mean, if you're stuck in your house, like you're for the whole time working, well, we were all working online for everything. So you need to find.
How did you find like working from home during that period though?
I hated it. Then I loved it. Then I hated it again.
You get bored of it, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, the beginning bit, I was like, I just don't like being stuck in one place like that.
Yeah.
But then being able to, like, literally, you wake up, your desk is right there. No commuting, no travelling in. So when I got to that point, when you finish work, you're like, oh, I'm already at home.
Yeah.
I love that.
I had a setup and everything.
Yeah, same.
It was good.
I don't.
So like, I'd work at we've got this kitchen island, and I'd work there, and the light would stream in, and it was really relaxing.
Yeah.
So I'd have my laptop there and other iPad and various other things. I got an iPad.
Specifically, yeah.
Yeah.
To be fair, I think I upgraded mine during that time as well. Just
it was really good for teaching as well because
using that,
using your iPad, drawing out mathematical figures and all that kind of stuff.
When it locks the little like if you're doing non-verbal or mouse, it locks the shapes perfectly in place for you as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had a big setup as well. I had 2 screens, iPad underneath, laptop on one side, speakers, the whole.
Yeah, I think it was incredible how adaptable people can be because at first it was just the effort of working from home. Even though it seems like it, you think about it in your head, I've got more time to work from home and that kind of thing, and I don't really need to get out of bed, go to work, commute and all that stuff. But there is an effort associated with it.
Do you find you got like a lot more actual work done? I did.
I got a lot more done, but at the same time, like because there were fewer people around me, I I definitely felt like, well, my mind just kind of put off the fact that, I've got friends and stuff like that I want to see. And it kind of adapted to the fact that we were on our own. But some people, especially, I think like more extroverted people, they must have really struggled with that because, they're really used to people or people in HR and stuff like that. That kind of personality that they always want to hang out with people every day, and they're people, as it were. They must have found that really difficult. Even though you've got Zoom and various tools to deal with that.
It's not the same though.
It's just not. It isn't the same. Like,
there's so many like non-verbal cues and things that you would pick up, and not even just that, just people's energy. You can't really, for the most part, get that through screens.
Because like most of your communication actually is in your body language.
Yeah.
And
if all you can see is like from the neck up.
Yeah, you don't really see much there. What about with students specifically? Like, did you notice? Obviously, we see a range of students from state schools, private schools, all kinds of walks of life and
ages as well.
Yeah, and age groups. Did you notice anything in particular with certain age groups, or?
I found the younger ones were the proper young ones, like year 3 or year 3, year 2. They were difficult online. They have to sometimes have parents in with them, especially year 1, year 2. They've got to have parents with them. Year 3, they started to be sort of more independent, and they were okay. Online, the best people to teach online were year 4s up to probably year 8 or 9, key stage 3, because they're still interactive, they still have conversations, they keep their cameras on and their microphones on.
That's true.
Which is something that GCSE kids definitely don't do.
They
click off, blank screen for an hour. There's not reading body language, and then there's absolutely no.
Some of the GCSE ones were okay in that regard.
Yeah,
but
on the most part, that was the rule though.
But
that was the thing that people did.
I did.
And if they kept their microphones on, the camera would definitely be off. So it's very hard to see whether they're working, to see whether you can tell by people's faces whether they get what you're talking about or they don't.
I noticed that some. I had a year 6 class, and there was. I did notice that there was the odd student who, before the lockdown, were really progressing and doing really well, and then during that period online, really struggled with the change in interaction, whereas other students, especially the ones who I think are slightly more IT savvy, they enjoyed the novelty of it, especially at first at least. I think everyone got bored with it the first few weeks were great.
There isn't one parent that said, "Oh yeah, I prefer online."
That's true.
Not one. Every single one has said, "You doing face to face? Can we prefer face to face?"
And especially as they get older, because they're more likely to. I find that they're more willing to share their deeper feelings, and they're probably more aware of their mental health and that kind of thing. I thought it was easier to see when they were affected, when they were like GCSE age. I noticed that there was a lot more, people were obviously undermotivated and that kind of thing, especially when they cancelled exams, which we'll come on to. But I thought it was also just the fact that they didn't feel like they were receiving, or they were maybe anxious about the education they were receiving. Something else that is obvious from the literature that I've read, so we've done some research on this, and it points out that the impact on girls, as opposed to boys, was tended to be more pronounced. So girls were more likely to feel stressed and feel anxiety about the situation. So that that creates a bit of a gender divide.
Yeah, well, I guess girls are more social
Yeah,
than
social,
guys.
yeah,
Social
generally,
creatures,
yeah.
And they also, at that age, they actually care more about their schoolwork and grades, and boys at that age don't care as much. On the whole, like, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, we know that from data that girls have generally outperformed boys at a national level in terms of exam performance and that kind of thing. And yeah, I think there is definitely girls are a lot more focused on those results and stuff like that. So being in the position where they don't know really what they're being judged on, that can also be a bit of a problem and demotivating. Because I had quite a few girls working with me at GCSE, and they all said that they were stressed out and anxious and that kind of thing, and probably more stressed out and anxious than they'd usually be. In fact, a lot of people ended up taking more exams in this situation than they would have otherwise, because schools wanted to gather enough data for teachers to deliver these grades in the most professional manner possible. And you can understand why schools did that, but I think it ended up just being overloading. It just overloaded a lot of students quite early on. Anyway, so the next, we talked a little bit about online lessons.
Yeah, we jumped in on that one.
But let's just summarise some of the good and the bad points. On the good side, can you think of anything that we can learn from this and sort of take moving forward?
The good from being online, I'd say some math lessons and like verbal, non-verbal lessons were easier purely because of this
technology.
Yeah, and it has made me think. Like, it is quite tempting to get a few screens and just plug the iPad in, and because you can draw directly on the paper and stuff like that.
Yeah, it was easier in some ways to teach maths because it's so much faster creating shapes and figures and graphs and stuff.
If you need something like coordinates, for example, I was doing that with done the Key Stage 3 a lot over lockdown. I just drop a PDF into my notes app, and you can literally show them. You go across here, and we've got the little laser thing on GoodNotes. You go across here, you go up there, it's there. Whereas if you're sitting in a classroom with your booklet, and they've all got their booklets, it's very hard to show them what you've got to basically go around individually and go like that, like that, like that, like that. Whereas on here you can just go there, and everyone sees it.
Yeah. So.
And then you can, and then even after that, once you've done your lesson, because obviously you write your notes on that piece of paper, you can then send that booklet with teacher notes to everyone in the class.
Yeah, that's true. I found it was good working one-to-one specifically.
Yeah. In fact, I'm still doing that at the moment. I did one yesterday, or every week. Still got a few. Yeah,
working one-to-one specifically, because the issue that I had with online was gauging student understanding.
Yeah.
And sometimes that took a while to... you had to really sort of delve into, what have you got there? And then, obviously, in something like maths, it's not just a matter of getting the answer. It's how do you show that it's correct? It's like the working and the organising.
Yeah, if anything, getting the answer is lower down the list, quite far down the list. It's always like, do you understand how it works? Do you understand how we got to that?
Yeah, and presenting your answer well, that's a big part of
this. Well, this goes on to some of the bad stuff about going online. When you are trying to look over people's work,
that's difficult.
Can you hold up your notes to the camera, left, right, down, right there? Stop! Don't move. Yeah, it looks good.
Yeah.
And if the connection's bad, you can barely see it anyway. Whereas
Yeah.
in class you can see, have they made decent notes? Is it organised well? Is it neat? Is it clear?
There was something that I had more trouble with was English, because
Like writing tasks and things like that.
yeah, if you give them a writing task to do, it's not just you can get them to read out what they've written, but so much of it is about correcting those basic errors. You know, you want them to know when they make a grammatical error or something like that, or missing commas and stuff like that, and punctuation and spelling. How do you address it? You can get them to upload work, so scanning work or something like that. But then again, you've got students who don't have that facility available to them.
Well, I mean, they've all got phones and stuff they can scan. But the thing is, even then, they don't always know how to use it.
Yeah.
And even if they do know how to use it,
like if you get a 6-year-old, parent has to do it. So.
it's not even that. They'll send homework attached. So which out of our hundreds of students is this? Like, who is it?
Yeah.
What? And then I've had them where they scan the paper and after doing it, and the pages aren't. First, the files aren't numbered, so they come up in a whole jumbled order. And if, for example, they've taken a picture of a page and they've cut off the page number or the question number, you can't tell what order it's in, who's done the work. You know, that tells you which teacher it's supposed to go to, what class it's for, which mark scheme to use. I mean, there's so many things.
But I think what I've taken away from it is you've got the added reach of online, so you can reach students that you might not have been able to reach before.
Yeah, it's not geographically specific.
But I think what I've taken away from it is some technological things are great. So you've got the drawing, the figures and that kind of stuff and graphs. But then I don't think it really doesn't replace classroom teaching. And really what you can learn from this is that it can augment it, but it can't replace it. Unless there's some kind of VR solution in the future that sort of leads, I don't know, to you being able to create a virtual classroom.
Yeah, I think we spoke about this in our very first podcast.
But the technology is just
so far off.
What's the next thing that I wanted to talk about exams a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously we've had 2 years where the students haven't taken. I mean, they have taken a lot of exams, funnily enough, but they haven't taken the formative assessments. They haven't taken formal exams to achieve their grades. Now, there's quite a lot of issues. There's quite a lot of good points and quite a lot of bad points. But let's just start with, what do you think about sort of cancelling exams?
I mean, there was no way around it, really.
Yeah.
Especially the first set, because it was such a sudden, like, okay, we're not doing it.
Yeah.
And they had to figure out how to replace that. Personally, I don't feel like exams accurately test a person's ability to do something.
What did they test?
I mean, they test memory.
It test memory.
Test memory. A lot of people can not do anything and then cram in the short-term memory. You know, it goes down on paper and then it's gone.
Yeah. Short-term memory is very important when it comes to exams. What about...
Whereas I prefer... I mean, we talk about the different types of learners all the time. Auditory, visual. There's I can't remember exactly what it was. I think there's three ways of knowing whether you... Or 3 good ways of learning something. And in the top level is if you can teach it to somebody else, you remember it more.
Yeah.
The level below that is, I think, watching somebody else do it. And then underneath that is, like, I think listening, and then underneath that is reading it yourself and trying to figure it out. There's a few. I can't remember the exact thing. There's a few levels to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Forgot what my original point was, but-
I mean, yeah. The thing is obviously different learning styles, and those people who are able to identify the way that they learn have a big advantage in an exam situation.
Yeah.
Because-
Well, what would you? I mean, I think I know. What would you say your one is?
I generally remember what I listen to, so that actually helps me a lot in exam situation. Because if at school, if I listened to it, then I retained it without much practice. But then some people need, like they're visual learners, or they're kinesthetic learners. So things like, I'll give you an example. This year, a lot of children haven't been doing science experiments because they haven't been able to access that, and then you're taking away.
It's all conceptual, isn't it?
Yeah.
It doesn't become
You're taking away that
the concrete element of
the concrete element of learning that appeals to that type of learner.
yeah.
Whereas like someone like me, I'll just listen to the teacher say something. I'll just remember that and I'll
So
implement it.
Yeah. So if it was a learner like you, wouldn't have made
There's
too much.
difference. Well, no, I would have just got bored, watching the teacher on the screen, that kind of thing. I think that's the main thing. Is like even if it's, I haven't known anyone who's been in a better position because of this in terms of their learning. It definitely,
No, I don't think so.
like even if they were really, you had a lot of students who were really dedicated and hardworking, and even they got sick of it. So I haven't noticed any positives in that sense. Like I think most people are further off. Obviously, like we can't tell all of the effects of this because
You won't see the effects for years to come.
yeah, it's really difficult to say what the effects are now. But
That's not just
yeah,
exam related. That is everything.
yeah,
You won't see it for years, but you'll see it reveal itself.
Like the economic impact as well.
So going back to the formative, summative.
Yeah, so there's two schools of thought. There's this idea that students shouldn't really be assessed by examination only, or they should be assessed by examination only because it's more objective, as it were. And then you've got this idea that the teacher's feedback is the most valuable thing. What's your thought on that, Mike?
I mean, for me, I never really liked formal assessments and formal, papers, and I understand why they're necessary, and I understand.
Why are they necessary though? That's the.
I understand that I'm contradicting because I do it as a job, so I help. Well, I guess I help people to get through the stuff, the papers and things, so they might not like it either. A lot of them don't.
Yeah.
For me, I switched to subjects. I mean, I prefer creative subjects, as you know, and I switched to those subjects quite early on, or as early as possible, where it was a lot of coursework and less
Project based.
Yeah.
Sort of. Yeah.
I mean, you can tell by how we work now.
Well, I think that you've sort of keyed on to an important point because after Michael Gove brought in his reforms in 2016, off the top of my head, there was this collapse of coursework essentially. So students had been assessed by more of a combination. There was a lot more coursework and that kind of thing, and then it changed into this more of an exam-based system, purely exam-based system. And I actually think that what needs to happen and what would be most helpful for employers. So, you got to think at the end of the day, a lot of these students, they're coming, gaining their formal assessments, looking to gets a job eventually or do something in the workplace. I think that will be valuable to have a mixture of all three. So have some that gauge the students, some form of assessment that gauges the students, which is more summative, and you take the teacher's opinion into account. How hard the student's been working throughout the year, right? Because I feel like this happens with a lot of students. They sort of leave it to the last minute and mess around for a lot of the year, and then they do well in the exam, but then have they really learned anything from that? Like,
this is the thing. They learn how to jump through that hoop.
Yeah, they learn to jump through the exam hoop,
yeah.
but not through the hoop of life, essentially. You've got to learn. Like, I had one student who was a foundation student, and he got assessed in this way. He was doing really well, and he'd improved a lot in his maths. And then in teacher assessment, he's that kind of student who didn't necessarily get on that well with teachers, and they basically just gave him a 3, rather than, I think he, in terms of ability, he was definitely on a 4 or a 5. There's no way that he should have got a 3, but he didn't. He did say to his mum, and his mum was talking to me a few months afterwards and said he has learned a lot from that experience, because he's realised that he does need to get on with his teacher and stuff like that. So he has learned from that, from this instance.
But this is where I think we do something a bit different to school, because we try to keep everything relaxed, friendly, and not like a authority figure.
Yeah. And
if if a child has a problem with authority, when they come to us, we help them get through and we teach them, what they're here to learn.
Yeah.
But it's more of a friendship rather than a...
Yeah. No, yeah, it's a different sort of...
different dynamic.
You had a lot of cases of parents sort of bribing teachers, as it were, as well. I've read quite a lot about this.
I don't know.
And also, like, a lot of students have told me that, parents are sort of writing to teachers quite often during that period in order to sort of influence them in some way, and you can't have that.
So this is where, unless it's the same teacher marking the formal assessment, that's one of the negative things. Because if you're say you are extroverted and you're a people person, you're more likely to get a higher grade than if you're introverted and quiet in class. And
to be honest, a lot of students that were doing the GCSE, in the GCSE year this year, they were worried about that. They were worried about their teacher's perception of them as a person, because
rather than
ability. And that's just not. You really want to avoid that. So whilst I think there must be some place for this summative assessment, like, I'm sure there's some way that it can be integrated in the system. Project work too, I think you can make a lot more of those, the qualifications a lot more interesting if some project work were integrated into it. That has some kind of practical use outside of school, along with exams, because I think all three have a purpose behind them. But I understand that there are, with coursework, you always get the problem of parents helping and that kind of thing, and cheating. With
But if you're involved, I don't think it stops you learning what you're meant to learn.
Yeah. One thing that I did in school for A-level history was something called an individual assignment, where you can look into any figure, any historical figure that you choose, and or event or something like that, and you form a question. You form your own question and that kind of thing. Kind of like university, actually. And I think that kind of assessment has a huge place because in our education system, and we should try and integrate it into things like GCSEs and A levels, because it was a chance to first of all form your own question. So you study something that you're interested in. I think it was quite well, the way they did it was you did all the research and you took in a few notes in the exam. So it wasn't entirely based on memory, which I think is like not necessarily a bad thing. But you've done all of your own research. And obviously, because it was in the exam conditions as well, like it was like can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it was like 3 hours or 4 hours we were writing this long essay in. I think it sort of ticked all the boxes in a sense, because you have that sort of pressure as well of the time. And that's also something that, I wouldn't say it's the be all and end all, like how well someone does under pressure, but it is an indicator of, how someone could do in time conditions. So I think all forms of assessment should be more integrated into
I was going to say, think about the process that we go through when a new student signs up with us, and the process we go through when a new tutor joins us. So either side, first thing we do with a tutor, look at a CV, which is a formal thing.
Yeah, it's kind of a formal thing.
Well, it's a formal,
Yeah.
it's
a breakdown, isn't it?
Yeah. And they do a trial session with a class to see how they interact. Summative. Think of a student. They come in, they do a completely free trial session in a class, or we can have a summative. We can kind of see how they work, and then we do a formal written formative assessment.
Yeah, and
so we've integrated on either side. We've integrated both.
And I'd say, as I'm someone who always marks assessments and gives feedback, there's a lot you learn from both.
Yeah.
So you learn completely different things from both of them. In a trial session or something like that, or in the session itself and over a period of time, you learn how the student learns and how they approach work, how conscientious they are, that kind of thing. Their insecurities and their sort of weaknesses when it comes to interacting. How open they are with the teacher and that kind of thing. And then you're able to advise on the basis of that. But if you carry out a formative assessment, it can sometimes expose how the child does under pressure, how they cope with specifically worded questions and that kind of stuff. And you cannot learn that just by carrying out one form of the assessment. And I think that's really, really missing from a lot of our assessments these days. So GCSEs and A-level, whilst they've made everything a lot more challenging, I think it is now just it's about how you perform on one day. The other thing
we've had that with the 11 plus, and even the assessments during this week, we've had people that can easily 80-85% without the timing element of it, or the pressure. And then we've had them do the assessments this week, and it's just not gone well. Yeah,
they have a bad day, and I don't think from having one bad day, we can make a judgment about. Well, I don't think you can sort of say how competent someone is in that subject on the basis of the performance of one day.
But remember, when in the exams, the people marking the exam don't know that person, so that's all they have to go on.
And whilst that may be more objective, I don't necessarily think that objectivity is everything. Because how do we interact with people? We always form opinions. I think the teacher's feedback is relevant to that. And how the student conducts themselves in the class is very relevant to how they conduct themselves in life. So I would like to see in the future Gavin Williamson and or any other education secretary in the future. I'd like to see a bit more creativity when it comes to designing assessments. So without basing them purely on one exam or a set of exams that they do in a few days during the year. I'd rather see it spread out throughout, the 2 years. Kind of like how it used to be, but maybe with a few more additional components. But you can keep the challenging nature of them, because I think that's good. So like GCSE Maths, for instance, is much harder than it would have been a few years ago. And I think that's a positive change. But it's interesting to see that other side to students, not just how they perform in an exam. That tells an employer, or a university actually, very little about the student and how they work. Let's end it there. We've kind of gone on for quite a while about this, but it's something that we feel quite passionately about and is very important. This will affect us for many years, and I think it's important to sort of gauge and talk about things that are difficult to talk about. So thank you for joining us, and catch us next time.